It was January 22, 2017 in Ningbo, China, where the humid air of winter brushed the streets of Yingzhou District. The Ningbo Wildlife Park, a small but well-known zoo nestled on the outskirts of the city, prepared for another day of visitors. As families arrived in droves, the low murmur of chatter filled the air, mixing with the sounds of children laughing and playing near the zoo's playground. The towering walls of the park loomed around its borders, keeping the public at a distance from the animals within. The zoo was home to over 200 species, some native to China, others imported from distant lands. For most visitors, it offered an opportunity to see wildlife up close, though the conditions left much to be desired. The animals, many confined to small, overcrowded enclosures, were often taunted into performing tricks for the audience's entertainment. The filthy conditions and malnourishment of some animals were barely acknowledged by the visitors, and the harsh reality of life in captivity went unnoticed. But to those who spent enough time there, the zoo's grim atmosphere suggested that an accident might be inevitable. Mr. Zhang and his family had planned a simple Sunday afternoon out, accompanied by their friends, the Li family. As they approached the gates, both Mr. Zhang and Mr. Li felt that the 130 yuan entry fee, roughly $18 USD, was far too steep for what the zoo had to offer, so they decided to find another way in. Mr. Zhang's wife, unaware of their scheme, continued toward the main entrance with Mrs. Li and their children, oblivious to the plan that was about to unfold. The walls surrounding the zoo were high, at least 10 feet tall, but a tree near a section of the border caught Mr. Zhang's eye. It was close enough for him and Mr. Li to scale. The men, seeking a cheap thrill and the satisfaction of getting something for nothing, decided to bypass the ticket booth. They grabbed the low-lying branches, hoisted themselves up, and climbed the rest of the way to the top of the perimeter wall. On the other side of the wall, the ground was just a short drop away. Mr. Zhang, eager to see the zoo without paying, crouched down and let himself dangle from the edge. After a moment's hesitation, he let go, landing with a dull thud on the hard ground below. Mr. Li followed suit, both men celebrating their small victory. But a new challenge lay before them. Another wall, this time with sharp metal bars curving toward them like claws, stood in their path. Despite the clear warning signs posted on the wall, Mr. Zhang and Mr. Li pushed forward. Ignoring the signs and the risks involved, they searched for a way over. Mr. Li, with one foot on the other's shoulder, helped Mr. Zhang climb higher, their fingers gripping the bars. The climb wasn't easy, but it was manageable. When they finally reached the top of the second wall, they gazed down. Below them, 3 tigers lay in wait. Unbeknownst to the 2 men, they had climbed into the territory of Ningbo Zoo's most dangerous residents. Mr. Li, his heart pounding in his chest, quickly reconsidered. This was too risky. What had started as a bit of fun had quickly turned into a dangerous predicament. He began to climb down, deciding to retreat. But Mr. Zhang, now committed to the adventure, decided he wouldn't turn back. He was already there, and he wasn't about to leave without exploring the zoo further. Without a second thought, Mr. Zhang dropped down into the tiger enclosure. The tigers, alert to the intruder, stirred from their resting places. Their powerful bodies moved with precision as they slowly approached the new arrival. Mr. Zhang, having underestimated the animal's instinctive response, assumed they would be docile, as he had seen tigers in zoos before, usually disinterested or unbothered by the presence of visitors. But these were not docile creatures. These were wild animals, conditioned by captivity but still very much governed by their instincts. The moment Mr. Zhang's feet hit the ground, the tigers began their calculated approach, eyes fixed on the strange, vulnerable figure below. Visitors who had entered the zoo through the front gates saw what was unfolding in real time. Panicked voices rang out as children screamed and parents frantically tried to pull their families away from the viewing area. Within moments, one of the tigers lunged. It was sudden. The impact was violent. The tiger grabbed Mr. Zhang by the head, sinking its teeth deep into his skull. His scream was swallowed by the animal's powerful jaws. Mr. Zhang tried desperately to fight back, kicking and thrashing, but his body was weak compared to the raw strength of the tiger. His attempts grew more feeble as the tiger's grip tightened. On the wall above, Mr. Li stood frozen, his heart in his throat. He watched helplessly as his friend was mauled before his eyes. The situation was too dangerous for him to intervene. His mind raced, but no solution came. The tiger, with brutal force, tore at Mr. Zhang's body. Its fangs ripped through his jacket, exposing his flesh beneath. The other two tigers circled, keeping a watchful eye on the struggle, their hunger evident. The scene played out in front of horrified onlookers who had no way of stopping the carnage. For over an hour, the tiger toyed with its victim. It dragged Mr. Zhang across the grass, biting into different parts of his body before flipping him onto his back. Visitors watched in shock as Mr. Zhang's life slowly drained away. The tiger never let go. It was a predatory dance, a calculated show of power. The zoo staff had been alerted, and armed police soon arrived on the scene. At first, firecrackers were detonated, but the noise had little effect on the tiger. Desperate, zookeepers aimed a powerful hose at the animal, but it barely flinched. The tiger continued to drag Mr. Zhang's body, oblivious to the distractions. The situation escalated quickly. With the tiger still locked onto Mr. Zhang's lifeless body, armed police took action. Under the direction of zoo staff, they fired on the animal, bringing it down. The tiger, once a symbol of raw, untamed power, lay still. The other two tigers were secured and confined to their indoor pens, but the damage had been done. Mr. Zhang, though unconscious, was still alive when emergency responders rushed into the enclosure to retrieve him. He was quickly transported to the hospital, but the wounds were too severe. Hours later, he was pronounced dead. What began as a simple family outing had turned into a devastating tragedy. A wife had lost her husband, children their father, and a tiger had lost its life as a consequence of human recklessness. In the aftermath, the zoo faced heavy scrutiny. Mr. Zhang's family, mourning the loss of their loved one, called for the zoo to take full responsibility. They demanded improvements in security measures, including more surveillance cameras and stricter access controls. They argued that had the zoo's perimeter been more secure, their loved one might still be alive. It was the night of July 14, 2012. High temperatures in Yerevan, Armenia hovered as dusk gave way to an oppressive summer night. The city was mostly quiet, the kind of night where the streets emptied early and even the insects seemed to buzz in slow motion. Behind the dim glow of a broken street lamp in a small public park just blocks from the city zoo, three men loitered near a battered bench, their conversation loud and slurred. The group had been drinking heavily for hours, local vodka, cheap beer, whatever they could get their hands on. Bottles clinked against the bench legs and cigarette smoke curled lazily into the warm air. Among them was Edward Karsamian, age 34, an unemployed laborer with a history of petty arrests and a reputation for reckless behavior. Friends knew him as charismatic but unstable. He had a past peppered with impulsive choices, dropping out of school at 16, quitting jobs without notice, starting fights in bars. Born and raised in Yerevan's working-class Nor-Nork district, Edward had struggled to find direction since his teenage years. His parents divorced when he was young, and his father, a retired machinist, had largely distanced himself from Edward's troubled adulthood. With no steady job or family obligations, Edward spent his days drifting between short-term gigs and late nights on the streets. Those who knew him said he craved risk. His closest friend described him as someone who wasn't afraid of anything, especially not consequences. He'd once scaled a crane at a construction site for no reason other than to prove he could. Another time, he narrowly escaped arrest after setting off fireworks in a closed public square. It wasn't that he sought out trouble, it was more that he never flinched when it found him. That night, as the alcohol blurred the line between reality and bravado, Edward's eyes kept drifting toward the dark silhouette of the city zoo's perimeter wall in the distance. At just over 8 feet high, the barrier didn't appear overly secure. One of the men joked about sneaking in to see the animals. The joke turned into a dare, and the dare, under the influence of liquor and ego, soon became a plan. The zoo, like many underfunded public institutions in post-Soviet Armenia, operated on a shoestring budget. Maintenance was prioritized over upgrades, and staffing levels were barely sufficient for daytime operations, let alone comprehensive overnight security. The perimeter wall, built decades earlier, hadn't been reinforced in years, and its lack of motion sensors or surveillance cameras made it more of a symbolic boundary than a real deterrent. At night, with only one guard assigned to monitor the entire property, and often stationed at the front gate, vast portions of the zoo were effectively unpatrolled. It was a reckless impulse, but not an unusual one for Edward. At approximately 2:15 a.m., the three men were seen on surveillance footage approaching the wall from the south side. They scaled it using a large tree near the fence line and dropped onto the internal pathways of the zoo. By this point, their coordination was visibly impaired. The security footage captured them stumbling, laughing, and pointing at enclosure signs, none of which they seemed able to read. The zoo, lit only by sparse maintenance lights, was eerie in its stillness. Occasional grunts or growls echoed faintly, but for the most part the animals were asleep. Investigators later determined that the group wandered aimlessly for nearly 15 minutes before reaching the large cat exhibits. They passed several fenced areas before stopping at a low black iron railing near the tiger enclosure. The habitat, designed to simulate a wild terrain, was set into a depression in the earth. It featured natural rock ledges, a dry moat, patches of high grass, and several large boulders. The men leaned over the edge, whispering and laughing, until one of them urinated into the enclosure. Another tossed in a bottle cap. Then Edward climbed over the railing. Statements from his friends and video analysis indicate that he didn't hesitate. Usually, such enclosures would have at least a secondary barrier behind the railing, but budget constraints and construction delays meant it had never been built. He dropped roughly 6 feet into the enclosure, landing hard on a patch of packed soil. He laughed as he stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. His friends laughed with him for a moment, but a sobering realization immediately loomed over them. They shouted for him to climb back up, but the damage was done. From the shadows of the enclosure, 2 adult Siberian tigers began to stir. They were both male, massive creatures bred in captivity, but wild in every way that mattered. Siberian tigers, the largest of their kind, are solitary and territorial by nature. In the forest of the Russian Far East, they rely on stealth, power, and precision to hunt and survive. Even in zoos, far removed from the brutal efficiency of the wild, those instincts remain intact. With retractable claws that can slice through flesh and jaws strong enough to crush bone, they are apex predators, lethal, reactive, and intolerant of intrusion. A tiger doesn't see a person who has crossed the barrier as a guest, it sees a threat. When Edward dropped into their world, he didn't just enter a restricted space, he shattered a boundary written into the animal's core understanding of survival. And the response was immediate. What happened next unfolded in under 30 seconds. One of the tigers moved first, slinking low through the grass. Edward turned in time to see it charge. The impact knocked him off his feet. Massive claws tore into his chest, slicing through his shirt and digging into muscle. As he screamed and tried to crawl backward, the second tiger lunged. Its jaws clamped down on his neck. The 2 animals dragged him across the ground, their combined weight pinning him as they began to tear into his torso. The Two men above froze in terror. One vomited, the other ran. Neither made any attempt to help. Even if they had, it's unlikely they could have saved him. Edward was dead within moments. His body was partially dismembered and large sections of his chest and face were mauled beyond recognition. The tigers remained near the body, pacing and agitated, as the men fled the scene. It wasn't until 6:45 a.m. when the zoo's morning crew arrived that the attack was discovered. A groundskeeper making rounds noticed blood on the rocks near the tiger enclosure. He immediately contacted zoo officials who in turn called police. By 7:30 a.m. the area was cordoned off and veterinary staff tranquilized both animals to allow emergency responders to recover the remains. Edward's body was removed in pieces. A formal identification was made using fingerprints. Toxicology reports later confirmed a blood alcohol level of 0.21%, more than twice the legal limit for driving in Armenia. His friends turned themselves in later that day. Both gave statements describing the events, though parts of their accounts were inconsistent due to memory gaps. They weren't charged with any crime but were held for questioning and released after 48 hours. News of the incident spread quickly. Some outlets condemned the zoo's poor security, while others blamed the men's reckless behavior. The zoo, though facing public scrutiny, remained open. In a brief, solemn statement, officials admitted to security lapses but emphasized that the tigers had reacted instinctively to an intrusion. They urged the public to respect the fragile boundary between humans and wildlife, a boundary that only works when it's not crossed. The tigers were not euthanized, a decision met with both praise and criticism. Experts agreed the animals had simply defended their territory. Edward Karsamian was buried 3 days later with only a few in attendance. His mother, silent and pale, placed a childhood photo on his coffin, Edward beneath a tree, smiling. In the following months, the zoo reinforced parts of its fencing and added new warning signs, but the wall near the tiger enclosure was never climbed again. October 27, 2019 was a gray, quiet morning in central Illinois. Just outside Springfield, Meadowview Wildlife Park sat behind a line of cottonwoods and chain-link fencing, a modest facility with faded signage, gravel paths, and a small collection of regional and exotic animals. It wasn't a major attraction, but it had a loyal local following. Families came on weekends, school groups visited in fall. That morning, behind the closed gates of the carnivore wing, a routine task was about to turn deadly. Daniel Harker, 32, was one of Meadowview's senior keepers. A Springfield native, he had joined the zoo after studying wildlife ecology at Southern Illinois University and had worked his way up over nearly a decade. Daniel was known among staff as meticulous, soft-spoken, and deeply committed to animal care. He didn't crave the spotlight but often volunteered for the most difficult routines, working with predators, handling transport prep, monitoring new hires. He kept a notebook in his locker where he logged feeding behaviors and enclosure quirks, and on slow days he could often be found quietly repairing enrichment items or upgrading safety signage around the grounds. For Daniel, Meadowview wasn't just a job, it was a calling. As a boy, he had spent hours wandering its paths, studying each species plaque and watching the animals with a kind of reverence. Over the years, that awe never left him. He took pride in the small, invisible details: the right mulch for primate enclosures, the placement of logs and boulders for natural behavioral stimulation, the silence that meant a predator was at ease. If something needed fixing, he fixed it, not for praise, but because the animals deserved nothing less. He arrived just after sunrise, parking in his usual spot near the maintenance shed and clocking in before the other staff. The morning's assignment was familiar: clean the tiger enclosures, reset enrichment, and prep for the mid-morning feed. The park's 2 Bengal hybrids had already been shifted into their holding stalls for isolation, and Daniel proceeded toward the habitat corridor with hose and rake in hand. It was a routine he'd done dozens of times in a space he knew better than his own apartment. But that morning, something was just slightly off. The air felt heavier, the silence stretched longer, and Daniel, ever diligent, didn't ignore it. He just kept moving forward. The tiger habitat at Meadowview was one of its oldest and most confined. A rectangular yard enclosed by reinforced mesh fencing and concrete walls, it measured just over 1,200 square feet, large enough for pacing and shallow digging but too narrow for natural terrain. There were 2 adjoining holding pens with vertical guillotine doors that allowed the cats to be shifted in and out during cleaning. Visibility from guest areas was blocked during off hours, but staff corridors ran directly behind the exhibit fencing, with only a single access gate to the yard itself. On most days it was secure, but on this morning one of the guillotine doors hadn't fully latched. Jiva, the 450-pound male, had access to the main yard. Tigers are apex predators, and even those raised in captivity retain every tool they need to stalk, strike, and kill. Adult males can leap more than 20 feet and deliver a single paw swipe with enough force to fracture bone. Jiva had been at Meadowview for 4 years, transferred from a defunct roadside attraction in Ohio. Though typically calm around keepers, he remained isolated from guests and had never been directly approached on foot outside of medical sedation. Daniel stepped through the service gate and into the habitat without hesitation. The morning air was quiet, filtered through the mesh panels above, and the gravel beneath his boots crunched softly with each step. He scanned the enclosure, eyes moving automatically toward the shaded end where Jiva typically lounged. It looked empty, still, almost peaceful. He called the tiger's name once out of habit but got no response. A few enrichment items lay scattered around the logs. Everything seemed routine. What Daniel didn't see was that Jiva was already watching. The tiger had been resting in the shadow of a rock overhang out of direct sight from the service entrance. Years in captivity hadn't dulled his instincts. If anything, they'd focused them. His world was smaller, quieter, more reactive. The smell, the sound, the motion of something unfamiliar, like a human entering at the wrong time, triggered a switch. Daniel made it less than 10 steps before Jiva moved. The tiger launched forward without warning, a 400-pound blur of orange and black. The first blow struck him square in the back, slamming him to the ground. The second came almost instantly, a crushing bite to his shoulder and neck that jerked his upper body sideways, twisting it violently. Jiva didn't stop. The tiger dragged Daniel several feet across the gravel, biting down again near the base of his skull. His claws raked along Daniel's back, shredding his uniform and leaving deep lacerations in their wake. He shook his head with short, brutal motions, then pinned the body beneath his chest with a low growl and opened his jaws again. Daniel never had a chance to radio for help. In the adjoining corridor, a coworker heard the scuffle and moved quickly toward the access gate. Finding the outer door still locked, they immediately turned back to call for assistance. Inside the habitat, the attack continued for nearly a full minute. By the time help arrived, it was already too late. Staff used fire extinguishers and noise devices from the fence line in an attempt to drive the tiger back. It took several rounds, but eventually Jiva retreated into the holding pen. Once secured, the yard gate was opened and Daniel's body was pulled from the enclosure. He was still breathing but unresponsive. CPR was initiated on site and paramedics transported him to the nearest hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival. The cause of death was listed as excessive blood loss due to trauma. The injuries included a severed carotid artery, fractured vertebrae, and multiple deep puncture wounds across the upper body. The zoo was closed immediately. Officials from OSHA and the USDA arrived the following day to inspect the site. The malfunctioning latch was removed and analyzed, found to be misaligned and partially rusted from prior rainfall. The facility's enclosure designs and emergency access systems were reviewed, and new mandatory double verification procedures were added to all predator handling protocols. Jiva was not euthanized. He was relocated weeks later to a larger sanctuary with no on-foot keeper interaction. The decision drew quiet support within the zoological community. Jiva had behaved like a tiger. and the system in place had failed to protect the human in his path. Daniel's memorial was held privately at a local church. The zoo later placed a small plaque near the staff break room bearing his name and the date of the incident. At Meadowview, procedures were rewritten, locks were replaced, but for those who worked alongside him, the loss was not procedural. It was personal. Daniel hadn't been reckless. He hadn't ignored training. He simply trusted a system that didn't hold up. It was June 24, 2017, when the Southern California sun blazed overhead at the world-renowned San Diego Zoo. The 100-acre facility sprawled across Balboa Park, its winding pathways filled with the excited chatter of summer visitors exploring exhibits that housed over 4,000 animals from around the globe. The temperature had reached 89 degrees by midday, prompting many of the big cats to seek shade in the cooler sections of their enclosures. Carson Bell had spent most of his 17 years blending into the background at Westfield High School, a quiet junior who excelled in biology but struggled with social interactions. The summer science enrichment program had been his mother's idea, hoping it would help him build confidence before his senior year. For 3 weeks, Carson had attended field trips and lab sessions with 12 other students, but his attention had been entirely focused on Emma Rodriguez, a charismatic sophomore who seemed to effortlessly command attention wherever she went. The group had arrived at the zoo that morning as part of their animal behavior study unit, armed with clipboards and observation sheets. Carson had positioned himself near Emma throughout the day, desperately searching for an opportunity to distinguish himself from the other boys who constantly competed for her attention. His chance seemed to present itself when their chaperone announced a 30-minute break near the Malayan Tiger Trail, allowing students to explore the adjacent exhibits in small groups. As the group dispersed, Carson noticed Emma mentioning to her friends how cool it would be to get a selfie inside one of the big cab enclosures. The comment sparked an idea that would prove fatal. Carson had observed the zoo staff earlier that morning rotating animals between different sections of the tiger habitat, and he convinced himself that the main enclosure would be temporarily empty during the afternoon maintenance period. The Malayan tiger stands as one of the most formidable predators in the animal kingdom, with adult males weighing up to 310 pounds and measuring nearly 10 feet in length. These apex hunters possess incredible strength, capable of dragging prey twice their body weight up into trees. Their powerful hindquarters generate explosive bursts of speed, reaching 35 miles per hour, while their razor-sharp claws extend to up to 4 inches and can deliver devastating slashing wounds. Malayan tigers are solitary ambush predators with exceptional hearing and vision, evolved to detect the slightest movement in dense jungle environments. Carson had slipped away from the group while they gathered around the viewing platform, making his way to a maintenance area behind the tiger enclosure where a low gate provided staff access to the exhibit. The gate stood secured with a simple latch that Carson easily manipulated, his hands trembling with nervous excitement as he pulled out his smartphone to record what he believed would be his moment of triumph. The enclosure stretched nearly an acre, designed to replicate the Malaysian rainforest with dense vegetation, rocky outcroppings, and a flowing stream. Carson stepped through the gate and moved toward the center of the habitat, holding his phone at arm's length as he began recording his unauthorized entry. He had taken approximately 15 steps when the 280-pound male tiger emerged from behind a thick bamboo grove where it had been resting in the shade. The massive predator detected Carson's presence immediately, its amber eyes locking onto the intruder as its body dropped into a hunting crouch. The tiger's ears flattened against its skull while its powerful muscles coiled for the attack. Carson remained completely unaware of the danger, continuing to film himself as he moved deeper into the enclosure. The tiger launched itself forward with explosive force, covering the 40-foot distance in less than 3 seconds. Its massive paws struck Carson in the chest, the impact generating enough force to shatter his sternum and several ribs as he was driven backward onto the ground. The tiger's claws raked across his torso, creating deep lacerations that severed major blood vessels and punctured his right lung. Carson's phone flew from his grasp as the tiger's jaws clamped down on his neck and shoulder, its 4-inch canine teeth penetrating through muscle and crushing his clavicle. The predator's bite force of over 1,000 psi caused immediate damage to his carotid artery and jugular vein, while its powerful jaw muscles maintained their grip as Carson's body went into shock from massive blood loss. The tiger maintained its hold for several minutes, its instincts driving it to ensure the threat was neutralized. Carson's movement ceased as his blood pressure dropped critically low, his body becoming limp beneath the predator's weight. The attack had lasted less than 5 minutes from initial contact to fatal conclusion. Zoo visitors on the viewing platform began screaming when they witnessed the attack, immediately alerting security personnel who radioed for emergency response teams. Veterinarians arrived within minutes and used tranquilizer darts to sedate the tiger, allowing paramedics to extract Carson from the enclosure. Despite immediate medical intervention, Carson was pronounced dead en route to UC San Diego Medical Center from severe blood loss and traumatic injuries. The San Diego Zoo launched a comprehensive investigation into the security breach, reviewing surveillance footage that clearly showed Carson's unauthorized entry into the restricted area. Zoo officials emphasized that the tiger had acted according to its natural instincts when confronted with an intruder in its territory. The facility implemented additional security measures around all big cat enclosures following the incident. Carson's parents released a statement describing their son as a bright and curious young man who had made a tragic error in judgment. The family requested privacy while grieving their loss and urged other teenagers to respect wildlife barriers designed for public safety. The Malayan tiger was not euthanized, as investigators determined the animal had not displayed abnormal aggressive behavior.